Students of Connected North at home, I'm really excited to introduce you to our World War II, wrong war, War of 1812 veteran. I forget his name because
Jacob Sipes.
Jacob, right. So I'm going to introduce you to him, and he has the most fascinating things to tell you and to show you. So if you have any questions about any of the objects that are on his table or about the weapons that he has, please put them in the chat, because I know Jacob is really interested in learning about and teaching about his time. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and I'll be reading the questions to him because he can't see them very well from where he is. So let's introduce Jacob.
I stand here. This work?
That works. Yeah.
Hello there. How are you folks doing? This is very exciting for me. As you were told, my name is Jacob Sipes, and I've never talked to people in the future before. This is the year 1812, and welcome to my barn. And you were told that I'm a veteran of the War of 1812, and that's true. And I'm also a veteran of another war. Unfortunately, I've had to live through two big wars. The other one before that was the American Revolution. And so I'm hoping that there won't be any more wars after this one. But then I heard there's some World War II. Am I going to have to worry about World War II? Sorry, I'm going to ask Mally that. Do you know if I'm going to have to worry about World War II?
Just asking the student. Let's see if the students can type in the chat.
Sure. Yeah, anybody that can tell me is welcome.
World War II? Oh, maybe they don't know. Okay.
I don't know either, because I've never heard of World War II, so I have no idea when that might be coming.
Oh, Nichelle says yes. You need to worry about it.
Oh, great.
All but right. I think it's till 1939.
Oh, well, I don't really expect to live that long. And let me just check with this fellow Marty here. Do you know when I'm going to die? Oh, all right. Well, that's a little bit disappointing, but I'm going to die in 1825, apparently. So I've only got 13 more years left to go. So I guess I'm not going to have to worry about World War II. I mean, I can worry about it now, but I won't have to actually fight in it or anything like that. Thank goodness. But anyway, in my time, if war comes to your country, then all the men in theory are supposed to defend their country. And, if we're invaded, if our country attacks another country and invades them, it's a different matter. But the tradition is if they come onto our territory, all the men between 16 and 60 years old are supposed to fight to defend their country. So if that happens, that's happening right now here. The American Revolution was a little bit different. But anyway, I'll just tell you a bit more about myself so you know who I am and where I've come from. And then I'm happy to answer any questions at all that you have. I know that they're going to get me back maybe in a week or two to talk about being a pioneer, because I'm a pioneer farmer as well as being a veteran. So if you come back in a week or two, then we can talk more about being a pioneer. If you're not going to be around in a week or two, then you can ask me questions about being a pioneer as well. That's fine, of course. But my family have been pioneers for a long time. And, that's all that we ever wanted to do was just to get some land and build a farm and have a nice peaceful life. But unfortunately, history has decided otherwise, and there's been a lot of conflict in our lifetimes. And it wasn't our fault. We didn't start any of these wars, but they happened to us, and we were forced to fight, basically. So where I grew up is now the United States of America. at the time when I was born there, and and I was maybe your age, it was not the United States. It was part of the British Empire. So I was born in a British colony, or a British province, as they call them, the province of New York. And then when I was about 7 years old, my family moved into a different province called Pennsylvania, which is now a state, of course. Anyway, that's where we were living, in Pennsylvania, when the American Revolution started. And it was a rebellion, basically. Some of the Americans didn't like the way, well, actually, let me make sure I get this properly. Most of the Americans didn't like the way Britain was running things. And there were a lot of complaints about the taxes and how we were being represented in government. And some of the Americans, said, well, we've tried to negotiate with them. We've been complaining for many years. Britain is not listening. They're not going to change and make it fair for us. The only way that we'll get things to change is by war. We are going to have to attack them and fight them in order to get what we want. And pretty soon what those rebels wanted was an independent country of their own called the United States of America. Now, a great number of Americans did not like, number one, the idea of fighting a war to solve the problems with the British government. And number two, did not want to break away from the British and start an independent country. A lot of Americans really were afraid of that idea. So anyway, in the end, that's what happened. But in the meantime, we had to fight in a nasty civil war that we didn't want to fight in. When I was about 8, I wasn't 8. That's when we moved to Pennsylvania. When I was 12, the rebels came to our farm and they asked us to join their cause and fight for them. And we refused. And they said, well, if you're not with us, you're against us. And we still refused. And so they burned down our house and they burned down our barn, stole everything that was valuable. And they said, you have to leave and never come back here again or we'll kill you. They had guns, so there wasn't much we could do about it. So we just had to walk away from our farm that we built there in Pennsylvania. And we walked for about 2 weeks to get to the nearest British fort. And that was Fort Niagara. And maybe you can send a message in, to Mally. I'm just curious if any of you ever been to Fort Niagara before. I know that you apparently you live way far in the north, which people in my time have never dreamed of going that far north. But anyway, whether any of you have been to Fort Niagara, I'd be interested to know. It's near the big waterfall, Niagara Falls. So if you were to go over the falls and continue down the river to Lake Ontario, you would find the fort just on your right as you're coming up to the lake. Anyway, it's an old French fort. That's where we went as refugees. And my mother and sisters were moved to a refugee camp near Montreal, which was safer, further away from the action. Fort Niagara was a target of the rebels, and George Washington sent a huge army to try to capture it at one point. So anyway, my brothers and I, we wanted to stay and fight and try to fight to get our farm back and defeat the rebels. So we joined a group of soldiers called Butler's Rangers, and we did very well in the war. We never lost any battles, and we were greatly feared. But our side lost, as you probably know, the British side lost. We were called Loyalists. We were loyal to our king, King George, and loyal to Britain. And because we lost, we couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. But the British gave us a reward for our loyalty. They gave us land in a new province called Upper Canada, which I believe in your time is called Ontario. So we started over again here in Upper Canada. Some of my land was at Niagara, right along the Niagara River at a place called Fort Erie. And if you've been to Fort Erie, let me know as well, too, because you're really close to my farm. And I was building a nice farm there, and I got a wife and a family. And then this past year, the United States declared war on Britain. and they started building up for an attack to invade Upper Canada across the Niagara River. And so where my farm is right in the line of attack. So I decided it was time to get out of there, and I sold that farm. And my wife and 12 children and I, we moved west around Lake Ontario, past the end of the lake, out into the wilderness a fair bit, where there's another piece of land I was given for being a loyalist. So we're starting all over again here on land that hasn't been farmed. And at the same time, I have to serve as a soldier in the militia, which is the militia is the soldiers who are not professional soldiers, but just regular men who, as I said before, have to fight to defend their country. So it's a little bit tricky trying to keep a farm going and to be a soldier. Luckily, I have a lot of children that can help out as well. Two of my sons are soldiers in the militia as well, so they can't help with the farming, but the younger ones are able to do some of the work anyway. So that's where I'm at right now. We're in the middle of this war, and I'm quite happy to tell you whatever you'd like to know about it. And you can ask me things. We can start out that way and see what kind of questions you might have. And if you don't have particular questions, that's fine. I can share some things with you that I think might be of interest. Something I thought interesting that I heard was that you folks, your schools have been shut down, and because of some kind of a sickness in your country. And, that's kind of similar to what happened here, right now in 1812, the schools are all shut down. Well, I should say that there's a lot of places don't even have schools. It depends how long people have been settled in your neighborhood. Schools are not the top priority when you first settle. So just the way things have worked out, when I was your age, the schools were shut down during the war. So I never went to school. I never, excuse me, I never learned to read and write. And now my children growing up here, there's no schools built yet because it's such a new area. So I know what it's like having things shut down, not because of sickness, although they say that they're in a couple of decades, a big sickness is going to come through here that's going to be pretty awful, but that hasn't happened yet. So no, anyway, I'm sorry to hear that that's happening to you folks there, but it's a little bit like being at war, I suppose. So anyway, do you have any questions at the moment for me?
Yeah, they do. First of all, Charlotte and Isaiah say they live in St. Catharines, which is close to you, and her grandparents live in Fort Erie, and Charlie and EJ have been to Niagara Falls. So ask them if they know where that is. They've said that. So Charlie wants to know, why did the War of 1812 start, and why did your family not rebel?
All right. So I'll go in order of history here. Why my family didn't rebel during the American Revolution. One of the biggest reasons was that we felt that we owed Britain kind of a debt. We were very grateful to Britain because my family came over from Germany in the early 1700s when there was a lot of war going on in Germany, and a lot of families had been displaced by the war, and they were not able to go back to their farms. And so Britain offered to bring families over from Germany and settle them in New York, in the New York province, not in New York City, but in the countryside. So my family came over and were given land by the British. And so they really felt a lot of gratitude for that. And that carried on for several generations at least to me and my brothers and sisters. Plus, we didn't really think that going to war was the best way to solve a problem that you have with your government. Let me just ask you folks there, and you can send in your answers. You could imagine in your time, perhaps, if your government was doing things that were unpopular with the people, like a new tax that everybody really hated, new laws that were unpopular, or people thought they weren't fair. They make changes to how you are represented in the parliament, things like that. And the government won't listen, and it doesn't seem like you're able to make any changes with them. How many of you would want to join in a rebellion, an armed rebellion where you're going to fight and kill and possibly be killed? So how many of you would want to do that, and how many of you would say, no, that is not appropriate, that I'm not willing to fight over something like that. There's got to be better ways, and or anything is better than actually killing people over something like that. So just if you can, send in your opinion on what you would do. Would you want to fight or find another way if that happened in your time?
Well, Nichelle, Gibbler, and Charlie say, no, that's not good. And Charlotte said, find another way. Gabby said no. Owen said no, but there's somebody here that says they're in the Navy cadets. So they're training to be going into the military, so they don't know. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, people were divided in my time during the American Revolution. Americans were quite divided, and you can look at what some of the people calculated at the time. They figured about 1/3 of the Americans at the time did not want to fight against the British. 1/3 overall. And it depended what part of America you were in. In some parts, it was pretty much everybody thought it was a bad idea. Those are places that didn't join the revolution. You might have heard of the 13 colonies that did rebel. There were about 13 other British colonies that did not rebel, including places that are part of your Canada today, like Quebec. Quebec did not want to rebel. They did not join in with the other colonies. Nova Scotia did not join in. St. John's Island, which is now Prince Edward Island, I guess you call it, it was Prince Rupert's Land in my time. I'm not sure, it's been divided up, I think, in your time. Florida, there are actually 2 Floridas. They did not join in the rebellion. Georgia almost stayed out of it, and actually New York almost stayed out of it as well. New York was quite loyal to Britain. So just to give you an idea, there was a lot of division amongst the people at the time. In some areas, it was more popular to join the rebellion, like in the New England colonies, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island were very supportive. Virginia. A lot of the other ones, it was very mixed. And people also didn't like the idea of, all right, these rebels are, these rebel leaders are going to end up being in charge of this new country called the United States. And we don't really trust these guys. They're kind of hotheads, and they're up in arms all the time, and we don't really want them telling us what to do. That was another reason not to join. Another one was one of the issues at the time was over expansion to the west and treatment of the natives. And Britain had just declared that there was a line now drawn on the map, a boundary, and no more settlers were supposed to go west of the Appalachian Mountains because there was just too much fighting, too many people trying to steal land from the natives, starting wars with the natives. And Britain said, no more of that. We're going to do things peacefully, and maybe we don't need to go any further west. And a lot of Americans really got up in arms about that and said, no, we're going to go and take whatever land we want. You can't tell us what to do. So that was, depending on how you felt about that issue, determined which side you supported it as well. So anyway, those are some ideas for you. And I hope it never happens in your time, because it was a horrible civil war. You ended up fighting neighbors against neighbors, families split up, where fathers fighting against sons. There's stories about brothers who killed each other on the battlefield, fighting on different sides. So anyway, hopefully it won't happen for you. the question about why we weren't rebels. And sorry, I forgot, what was the other question?
Why did the war start?
Right, the War of 1812. All right, so in some ways, you know, there were some bad feelings left over from the American Revolution, things that hadn't really been resolved. And even though the United States, you know, became an independent country, Britain didn't really like to recognize it properly as being an independent country, and were still treating the United States as if they were sort of rogue colonies. And the issue that really sparked things off was that Britain would go on to the United States sailing ships, whether they were merchant ships or army ships or navy ships, I should say, and they would say, all right, some of those soldiers are actually, or sailors are actually British sailors from our Navy who ran away, and we're taking them, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so there was a lot of disputes about who was a British citizen, who was an American citizen, and Britain was trying to get more men for their Navy because they were fighting against Napoleon, and they needed as many soldiers and sailors as they could get. So they were really pushing things. And this was considered a great insult to the United States, and that was a big part of why they declared war on Britain. The other thing was about westward expansion again, another issue that was left over from the American Revolution. The United States was continuing to move west, continuing to steal from the natives, attack them, fighting wars. And Britain was supporting the natives and giving them guns and ammunition and helping them to defeat the Americans. And of course, this infuriated them and was another major reason for why they declared war in 1812. All right, so those are the main things. Great questions there.
This Gibbler and Owen both wanted to know what kind of weapons you used.
All right, so the same weapon was used in both wars by almost all the soldiers in those wars. And does anybody know what kind of a gun this is technically? It's got a specific name. I'll let you send that in as an answer, and we'll see. Because it can be hard to tell without really being able to look closely inside the barrel of this gun to see what kind of a gun it is. We'll see if you can guess it.
We have 2 guesses for a musket and 1 for a rifle.
All right, so yes, it would be either one of those, and from your perspective, it would look the same either way. But when I say that almost all the soldiers were using this kind of gun, that makes it a musket, because rifles were only used by a very small number of soldiers during both wars. The way that war is done in this time, the musket is preferred because the musket is faster loading. I'll show you what's involved in loading this thing so that you can understand. And it's different, you know, when you're a farmer, we have guns like this, and they're usually rifles because rifles are better for hunting. We will carry our gunpowder in a powder horn, usually when we're hunting. But when you're a soldier, they want to speed things up a bit. And so what they do is they give us these cartridges, and they are made out of paper, and they've got just the right amount of gunpowder rolled up in there, as well as a musket ball. I've got one here. So what you do, you can't just dump this paper cartridge in there and then pull the trigger. That doesn't work. What you have to do is bite the end of this paper tube off first, and that opens it up. And then you're going to pour a little bit of gunpowder into this. Actually, I just thought of something you might find interesting. One of the requirements to be a soldier, apart from that you have to be at least 16, is that you have to have enough teeth and teeth that line up so that you can actually bite the end of a paper tube off. There are some people that don't have enough teeth to do that, so they can't really be soldiers. But anyway, you bite the end off, and you pour a little bit of gunpowder into this part of the gun. This is called the pan, You can see there's a little metal bowl here. So a bit of gunpowder goes there, and then you close the cover onto the pan there, and then you pour the rest of the gunpowder down the barrel, and the musket ball or the bullet goes down there, and the paper goes down there too. It helps to seal things in. And then you take out your ramrod, which is stored under the barrel, and you push everything down to the bottom of the barrel, which is down here, right beside that pan. Make sure you get your ramrod back out. And that's a real common mistake for soldiers that are in training. That they'll be so excited, you know, and they'll forget to get their ramrod back out. And then when they fire the gun, they end up shooting their ramrod away, and it'd be really hard to find. And then you don't have anything for loading your next shot. So anyway, that gun is ready to fire now. I mean, I didn't actually put gunpowder in it. I don't want to fire it inside my barn because then it'll put a hole in my wall that I'll have to repair. So I just went through the motions here. But what happens when you pull the trigger, there's this clamp here, which is holding a piece of flint. And this is going to spring forward, and the flint is going to strike this steel plate on the cover. And then the cover will go forward, and the sparks that are created by flint hitting steel, they drop down into this little pan of gunpowder here. And that gunpowder explodes, and then the fire goes through a little hole in the side of the barrel. I don't know if you can see that or not, but there's a hole there. And that fire lights up the gunpowder in the barrel and makes it explode, and then that travels down the barrel and out the end. And I'll pull the trigger here. You might see a spark or two, and but that's about all. It's not going to actually fire. All right, so you just get a click when it doesn't fire, and you know that happens sometimes. If your gunpowder is damp, it won't burn, and sometimes you get a misfire like that, which can be kind of dangerous because sometimes the powder burns slowly, and you take the gun and you're looking at it, and then all of a sudden it goes off and you're not aiming it properly, and you might injure somebody else. So you really got to watch out. And what can be especially tricky is when we fight in battles. Usually, most of the soldiers are lined up in big rows, and they're all firing together at the same time with their row. And so, you know, hundreds of guns fire at the same time. So it can be hard to tell if your gun actually fired because you hear this big loud bang everywhere and you think your gun went off. But no, you have to watch and see that there's smoke. There should be smoke coming out of the pan. There should be smoke coming out the end of the barrel. And that tells you that your gun has fired. If it didn't fire and you don't realize it, and you go to load another shot, if it was slowly burning and all of a sudden it flares up, then you could get your fingers blown off. Or if it didn't go off at all, you might end up loading it again and again, and you might end up with, you know, 3 times as much gunpowder in your barrel. And then if that does explode with that much gunpowder in there, then the whole barrel can explode in your face. And you see that happening quite a bit if people are using guns that haven't been looked after and have gotten rusty. You got to keep these oils on the inside and the outside to keep out the rust. Otherwise, the barrel gets weak and it can't contain the explosion of gunpowder. So there's a lot of things that you have to be careful with, obviously, with guns like this. Now, back to the original point about...
Marty, hold on. Marty, we're having some technical issues. Katie, can you please... The kids can't see Marty Big. They've been putting in the chat. They can't get the presenter back up, just me. For some reason, are you able to see Marty?
Yeah, no problem. Give me 2 seconds.
You can still hear me though, right?
Yeah, but they can't see you. They can only see my screen for some reason.
I mean,
Sally, I think you have host actually. Can you pin him?
I don't have host. Do you have host?
Okay, it's doing something funky on my end too. Hang on a sec.
And Gibbler was fine the whole time. So we're just trying to fix it, guys.
Now I can keep talking if you want. You can just interrupt me if you need to communicate with each other. It's up to you.
We can't see you. All I can see is Katie's screen now. So that's, unfortunately, that's what the kids were seeing. So we just want to make sure that they see you only.
Yeah, I'm just going in on the back end here trying to fix it. Give me 30 seconds.
So they probably didn't see me holding my gun up close there to show the hand and all that.
Marty, try making some noise on your end, like be quite loud, and it should pop back to you.
Hello, hello, come back to me. I have no idea how these things from the future work. Is that doing anything?
Nope. But Katie, maybe if you mute your mic, it'll work.
Hello, come back, come back.
Okay, Marty, we're going to maybe ask, oh, there you go. Got ya. So now, Katie, could you possibly pin him? Yeah, he's, okay, so he has to be host. You're in charge, Marty.
Is someone gonna stick me with a pin?
Students, can you see him? Because we can see him now. Okay. Okay. So I think maybe if you could explain the difference between a musket and a bayonet, and the kids can have another good view of the gun.
Yes, yes. So what I was saying there, and those things will come into it, the amount of time it takes to fire a shot on a musket is about 15 to 20 seconds. And that's if you're well trained and fast. A rifle has a different kind of a design inside the barrel. So everything else is the same. You've got the pan and the lock, which is this part here with the flint. This is a flint lock. And you've got a barrel. But if you could look down inside this barrel, which is hard to see because it's dark in there, this is very smooth on a musket, totally smooth. In a rifle, it's got grooves cut into it in a spiral. So when you fire a bullet out of a rifle, there's a spin on it. It's spinning sideways. And that, for some reason, actually makes the ball go straighter. And so you have a better chance of hitting your target. You're probably thinking, well, why not have all the soldiers use rifles, because then they have a better chance of hitting the target. The drawback is the ball has to be loaded in tight with the rifle so that it can go along with those grooves. And it takes longer to get that all loaded in there and with your ramrod pushed all down. It has to, it's so tight, you have to work it down gradually. So it takes 1 or 2 minutes to load a shot on a rifle. So what they've found is that in a battle, it's much better to have a whole bunch of soldiers that can fire quickly. They maybe can't hit their target quite as well, but on a big open battlefield where you've got thousands of soldiers in rows, it doesn't really matter so much. They're all aiming their guns across the way at the enemy, and it's basically like a big shotgun, and they're firing thousands of bullets all at the same time. And that's why, soldiers usually, in a big battle, you don't know if you've killed anybody or not when you fire in those big lines. And the British have been very critical of the Americans for using a lot of snipers with rifles, because they know when they kill somebody, and they say that's murder, basically, to be targeting somebody like that and killing them specifically. So it's kind of controversial to be using a lot of rifles. Now, Malin mentioned the bayonet. Something that happens in battle, you might fire so many shots and the enemy moves closer, and at some point you're not going to have time to load another shot. You're not going to have 20 seconds left, and your enemy will charge at you. And because you can't fire a shot at them, you have to use your gun in a different way. So one way is to use it as a club. And if you look at the this is called the stock here, this wooden part. You might have heard of lock, stock, and barrel. Those are the different parts of the gun. The lock is where the flint is here, the flint lock. And then the stock is the wooden part. And then, of course, the barrel is the metal barrel there. So anyway, the stock has a brass plate around it to give it extra strength. So you can ram it at somebody. You can swing it as a club and hit people with it. And even more nasty than all that, you can mount a bayonet onto it and turn it into a spear. Right? So this is an old bayonet that I think one of my horses stepped on it and it doesn't fit anymore. But anyway, this is a very nasty piece of equipment. And if you look at it straight on, you'll probably see that it has a triangular shape. And if you think about getting wounded with one of these, it's very hard to stitch up a wound from a bayonet. If you've got a cut on your body and it's just a straight line, then stitching it up is pretty simple, right? You just stitch the two sides together. Imagine trying to stitch a hole in your body that's in the shape of a triangle. Very difficult to do that. So the wound is especially nasty. And that's assuming that, that the wound is not dirty. Most of the wounds that you get in battle, there's a good chance that they are going to be dirty and that the wound is going to rot. And that's why the usual treatment for wounds in battle is just to cut that part of your body off because the chance of it healing are very low. And the chance of you dying from the rot are very high. All right, so that is the main weapon that almost all soldiers are using in battle is the musket. All right, good question. And we'll take another one.
Okay, so hopefully it'll go right back to you, but someone wanted to know how the soldiers are fed when they're fighting.
All right, so that can be very challenging to have enough food. And sometimes, the Army, when it's a big group of soldiers in the Army, then they will be shipping food to them, usually in barrels. They'll have, usually pork is the most common meat, but sometimes beef. But it'll be preserved in salt. It'll be heavily salted. And sometimes it's not very fresh at all. It's, in fact, on the verge of being rotten. I mean, sometimes they do open up a barrel and find that it is rotten. And sometimes the Army is so short on food that people might actually eat it because otherwise they're starving. Same with bread. It's hard to get fresh bread. So the Army will have what's called biscuit produced, and it's similar ingredients to bread, but it's very dry and hard so that it will keep for a very long time. It can actually keep for years, and you can transport it easily. So those are kind of the basic rations that you would have carried around when the Army's on the move. At the forts, they can usually get a bit better food. They can buy more fresh food from the local farmers. You can get some vegetables more easily. During this war in 1812, it's been especially difficult because this province, Upper Canada, is a pioneer province, and most of the farms are not producing very much food yet because it takes years to build up your farm to make very much food. And a lot of them just have enough to feed their own families. And so you bring in extra soldiers from the British Army, and then you bring in armies from the United States who invade and come around and steal food. And it ends up being basically a famine where we have a major shortage of food. And that's happened, that started already in 1812. And the longer this war goes on, the worse the food shortages are. Because sometimes armies, they don't bring food with them. They plan on stealing it from the locals wherever they go. And that's what a lot of the soldiers from the United States are doing right now. All right, good question. Next.
Tony wants to know, what do you do in your free time, if you have any free time?
All right, so yeah, when you're a soldier, there can be some free time. There's a lot of times when you're just waiting around for something to happen or for other groups of soldiers to meet up with you before you can move on and go on your mission. There's lots of games that are played, sports, football, wrestling, music is popular. Actually, somebody wrote a song after we captured Detroit that was about that victory. And I play a musical instrument myself, and I thought it would be neat to play this song that was written right after we captured Detroit just a few months ago. And it's called "Come All You Bold Canadians." Somebody told me, I was told that you might have the words for it, but if you don't, I can just tell you what they are. And you're welcome, if you do have the words there on hand, then you're welcome to sing along with me. So it's called "Come All You Bold Canadians." Come all you bold Canadians, I'd have you lend an ear unto a short ditty which will your spirits cheer. Concerning an engagement we had at Detroit town, the pride of those Yankee boys so bravely we took down. The Yankees did invade us to kill and to destroy, and to distress our country, our peace for to annoy. Our countrymen were filled with sorrow, grief, and woe, to think that they should fall by such an unnatural foe. Come all you bold Canadians, enlisted in the cause, to defend your country and to maintain your laws. Being all united, this is the song we'll sing. Success unto Great Britain, and God save the King. Right, so feel free to sing along. Right, so that's "Come All You Bold Canadians," a song that was written just this year in response to our victory. And you might find this interesting. In 1812, a lot of Canadians thought that we were going to lose, and the United States was going to easily capture our province and make it one of the United States. And a lot of people living here said we should not even bother fighting. It's just going to make it worse. So here's another question for you. If the United States were to invade you today in Canada, how many of you would think it would be a good idea to resist and fight back? And how many of you would say, no, it's a bad idea. There's no way we can win, so we might as well just surrender. That's exactly the issue that came up here this year. And our leader, Lieutenant Governor Isaac Brock, he said, no, you got to fight. You got to fight. We can beat them, or at least we can hold them off. Part of the problem was that Britain was so busy fighting Napoleon in France and Europe that they couldn't send very many soldiers here to help us. And so it was more up to us to defend ourselves. So he said, if we can hold on for a year or two, Britain will send us, hopefully, more soldiers, and then it'll be a lot easier to win. And he was very bold, Isaac Brock, and he went to Detroit. I went with him. I was part of the group that went there, and we were outnumbered by the soldiers there. But he was very clever, and he played several tricks on the American commanders there to fool them. He had us militia dress in old red coat uniforms. You see, I'm a soldier. This is what I've been wearing in the war. I don't have a red coat like a British soldier. That's for the professional soldiers to wear. I'm just a regular citizen. So, but at Detroit, I wore a red coat like a lot of the other militia soldiers, so that the Americans would think that there were a lot more professional soldiers. When they look at militia soldiers like me, they don't worry as much as when they see the red coats, because they're very well trained. And he also he wrote a letter to another British commander and let the Americans capture this letter. It was a fake letter, and it said, it was supposedly being sent to another British fort, and it said, "Stop sending us native warriors. We have enough here already. We have thousands of them, and we can't feed them, and there's just too many of them here. And, it's just going to be a massacre when we attack the Americans at Detroit." And this really scared the Americans at Detroit because they were very scared of the natives, and, it was real terror for them. And so when the battle finally started, they surrendered almost right away. And nobody was hurt on our side. There were hardly any shots fired because they were just about ready to go mad with fear. So we won this victory at Detroit. We captured Detroit, and that was the song that we were singing on our way back home again. All right. So anyway, look that up if you're interested more about Detroit, because it was an amazing victory. All right. Other questions?
We did have another question. Why did you in particular become a soldier?
Well, that's an interesting thing because even though in theory every man who's between 16 and 60 is supposed to become a soldier here during the war, most of the men are not actually doing their duty and being soldiers. So part of it is because they don't think we can win and they don't want to fight in a lost cause. Part of it is some of these men just came as settlers from the United States only in the last few years. We've got a lot of immigrants from the United States here, well, including me, but our group is known as the Loyalists. And so, we Loyalists really don't have a very good attitude towards the United States. They stole our farm, they burned our house and barn down, they ruined what we had. I blame them for my father's death. He died of a heart attack, but the stress from the rebellion that did him in. So anyway, the last thing I want is for our province to become one of the United States, which we already fought to try to stop. So for us, there's no question for a lot of us Loyalists whether we should fight or not. It's automatic for us. But for these other people who weren't Loyalists, then it's a lot more difficult to know what to do. And Isaac Brock, by winning a victory at Detroit, he convinced a lot of people that fighting against the invasion was not a lost cause, that we can defeat the Americans. So a lot of men did join up as soldiers after that victory. And even more importantly, a lot of the natives also joined up because they weren't sure whether Britain could defeat them. And once we won at Detroit, they were very impressed. So they've been coming out in larger numbers. And they are very good to have on your side for a number of reasons, especially because the Americans are so scared of them. All right, any other questions there?
Do you guys have any other questions? Are there maybe some of the? I have a question. What is that white band around your arm for?
Oh, right. So because I'm in the militia, right? And we don't have uniforms usually. When we fight against the Americans in a battle, they can be dressed much the same as us. I mean, exactly the same as us. And it can be very confusing as to what side you're on, if the soldiers get mixed in amongst each other, which happens. So you don't know who's on your side. And so we decided that the militia in Upper Canada, we would put a white band around our arms to show that we're on the British side. And we did this during the American Revolution as well, because, this is basically a civil war again. And there's been stories again where brothers have killed each other on the battlefield because we've got people, all kinds of Americans living here in Upper Canada, In fact, we didn't start calling ourselves, we're only just starting to call ourselves Canadians. I've still been thinking of myself as an American until this very year. This war is separating us from the Americans. We consider ourselves British Americans, but we're living here in America, so it's natural that we're Americans. But now we see ourselves as Canadians, and there's more of a separation between us. But it's still, there's a lot of Americans fighting against people that they're related to in this war. There's British people that have come to the United States who are having to fight against British soldiers. There's natives that are supporting the United States, fighting against natives that are supporting the British. There's a lot of Irish soldiers in the British Army, and they're fighting against Irish immigrants to the United States. So it's a civil war on many levels, and it can be confusing sometimes who your enemy is and who's on what side. All right, thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's a great answer. This is a really interesting one because you alluded to it a little bit. What do you do when someone gets sick?
Right, so here in Upper Canada, we have very few doctors. Almost everybody is a farmer here. And so we are, we're a very young colony, and it takes a while before professionals like doctors and other, skilled tradesmen will come into an area. They want, things need to get more settled, and people have to have a bit more money to spend before a doctor will figure that there's a business there for them. They tell me in the future that your taxes pay for the doctor, which that's very different. In our time, there's hardly any tax at all. The taxes are very, very low here, and there isn't very much provided either. We're not provided with health care or anything like that. So if there is a doctor around, it's very expensive, and chances are you're going to have to travel a long way to find a doctor. And by the time you get to them and then get them to come back with you, it might take several days. And the person that you were trying to get help for might have died in the meantime. So a lot of times we feel that it's just left up to us to do the best we can. And women in this time usually know a thing or two about remedies that they've learned from their mothers and grandmothers and so on. So it's usually a lot of times it's left up to them to do the best they can. If somebody, like I said, is injured in battle, the Army has surgeons that will work on them. But during a large battle where there's a lot of people being injured, like I said, they don't have time to do very much else for people except to just cut things off that are injured, because overall that's the best way to save people. There might be the odd person that maybe they didn't need to have their arm cut off, but the doctors and the surgeons just don't have time to really carefully try to fix everybody, and they'll save more lives just by doing a lot of amputations. So if you get injured on your farm, in peacetime, and you need somebody to amputate it, we usually will go for a doctor, even if it might take several days, because most people who are not trained to do amputations are not going to try to do that unless it's really desperate. But the chance of the person surviving is very low if you don't have the training. All right, good question.
Whoa, what an answer. So there are two questions left that maybe we could talk, that you could address in the short time that we have left.
Sure.
Do you ever get to visit your family during the war is one. And then, were there ever women present at battles, or was it all just men?
All right, those are great questions. So visiting your family, when you're a regular British soldier, that wears the red coat, usually you don't have a family because you've signed up to be a soldier for life, and that doesn't usually include getting married for most of them. A few of them do have wives and families, and they actually bring them with them. They're in the fort with them, and they might be in the Army camp with them. And those Army wives will work for the Army doing cooking and laundry and things like that. So they're around during battles and so on. But for soldiers in the militia like me, we are not required to stay for too long. And, you know, it's understood that we have families and that we have farms. And so they will try to not take us away from our farms and families as much as possible. Sometimes they don't have any choice. But when that happens, if our harvest needs to happen on the farm, then you get a lot of militia soldiers that will desert. They're called deserters. They run away home to do their work. And in theory, the militia are supposed to be punished with a whipping if they desert, or at least pay a heavy fine. The regular soldiers can be executed for deserting, because it's a very serious thing. If your soldiers all start running away, then you've got a big problem in the war, right? So they have to be very strict in their punishments for people that desert. But no, we leave the women are left at home for the militia soldiers, and sometimes, you know, they have to fight. You know, our farm might come under attack, and it might be a life or death situation, and they might have to get the rifle and use it to defend themselves. And because there's all these American soldiers marauding around, raiding and stealing things and doing nasty things to people. So some women have had to defend themselves with guns, and that happened during the American Revolution as well. So women are not allowed in the Army as soldiers. It's only men. There have been a few stories, though, of women who have disguised themselves as men because they really wanted to fight. Now, it's hard to say how many did that, because if they were successful at fooling people, then you might never hear about them. They kept it a secret. But there have been some that have been caught doing that. And women, you know, they play a very important role. They're looking after the farms while we're gone, defending the farms, and they can help in the war effort as well. The best example of that, I'm sure that those of you that live in the Niagara area have heard of Laura Secord. I think she lived in, or she was in your area at one point. She gathered some information from the invading Americans about what an attack they were going to do. And she walked for many miles to tell the British that they were about to have a surprise attack on them and save them. Some people say she actually saved the war by doing that because the Americans might have captured this province and made it part of the United States. So there's an example of a woman. She didn't fight in any battles, but she played a critical, important role in the war itself. All right, great question.
And I guess we'll leave it one last one because there's 1 minute left.
Sure.
Were there ever any children in battle?
Yes. Now, technically, you're supposed to be 16, but during war, quite often the armies will take any boy that might look like they're 16. They won't ask a lot of questions. If they look like they're 16, you know, they're big for their age, they'll happily take them because they want as many soldiers as they can. If they're able-bodied and they can shoot a gun, you know, they could be 12. I actually joined when I was 12. They took me because they were desperate for soldiers. And in our group during the American Revolution in Butler's Rangers, there was a 9-year-old boy in our group of soldiers. He started out just being a drummer boy, but by the time he was 12, he was firing a gun and going into battles and so on. So you do get a lot of boys because they're figure that they're needed. Good question.
Well, Jacob, thank you so much. All of the students were saying that this was a great, Charlie said, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for your teaching and taking time out of your day to learn about history. And Tanya says thank you, and Charlie. And Gibbler said that he read that some soldiers were 5. But this was a really informative session for us. And thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you. This was a wonderful experience for me to meet you people from the future, and thank you for all the wonderful questions and everything. Really great.
It was amazing. Thank you so much. I learned so much.
Me too.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So we'll maybe see you again. I don't know, but I know we for sure are going to be meeting the Pioneer, and are also going to be learning about medieval music. Maybe that was an ancestor of yours. We don't know, but we'll see you later.
I think it's going to be me or maybe my son for the Pioneer stuff. My son might do it.
Cool.